Now that the model is complete, we're ready to put our texture on. Now, unlike our past project, where each element had its own texture map and color node, we're going to apply one node to all of the content of this model. So I'll marquee select it, and I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to assign the new material. I'm going to use a Lambert, and I'll just name this room. And I'm going to follow the color node out by clicking on the checkerboard pattern at the end of that little slider bar. Now when the Create Render node comes up, I'm going to click on this procedural checkerboard pattern that's built into Maya. And if I were to go to my viewport now and hit 6 on the keyboard, all of geometry's got some sort of a checkerboard pattern on it. Now, we'll need another tool to accurately place this in the upper right corner of the UV Texture Editor. So let's get the UV Texture Editor. I'm going to hold down Command-Shift. I'm going to go to UVs. At the very top is UV Editor. And if you've gone over the Create tutorial, you're already familiar with this. You'll see a green button with the checkerboard pattern in the center. So I'm going to select my content, and then I'm going to click on the texture editor. I'm going to zoom back on this, and what you'll see is any sort of arrangement of some UV maps, and it's going to be a bit of a jumble, but we're going to straighten that out now. So I'm going to go to my model, and I'm going to select the back wall. And I had grouped this previously, so I'm going to click the up arrow. And I'm going to make this into one piece of geometry. If I want to open the door afterwards, I can by selecting and extracting the geometry. But I'm going to do this because my texture is made to go on a surface that is one piece of geometry. So with everything selected, I'll hold down the space bar, I'll go to Mesh and Combine. I'll center my pivot, and I'll hit W on the keyboard. Now this is a planar surface, so we want to identify the axes on which we would like the planar surface to rest. And that will be the Z-axis. Always remember that the axis you would pick is the one that is perpendicular to the surface that the texture falls on. I'll hit 6 on the keyboard. I'll hold down my spacebar, and I'll go to UVs, and I'm going to choose planar mapping, and I'm going to the menu for that. And I'm going to set it for Z, and I'll hit apply. Now, more often than not, the checkerboard pattern will get distorted. In this case, my rectangles are a bit squashed. I'm going to go immediately to my channel box with this. You'll see there's that virtual tool we talked about where we click on that and scale it here if we wanted to, but we want to be very precise about this. So when I go to the channels box and I look down towards the bottom of the inputs, you'll see projection width and height. I'm going to pick one number for both of them. It could be any number you want as long as you square out that checkerboard pattern. So I'm going to choose 25. Now I'm going to return to my texture editor. And if I look at my texture editor and zoom in, there's my wall, and it's hanging over the edges of that upper right hand quadrant. I'm going to get my scale tool by hitting R, and I'm simply going to scale that a bit to fall within my corner, like so, and I'm tucking it up in the upper right hand corner. Now I'm going to turn off the texture. The texture can be turned on and off with this little icon with the mountain peaks on a little green button. And I'm doing that so that I can see more clearly the actual UV maps. Now bear in mind, we're going to put the floor on this as well as the crate pattern, so we've got to have enough room for those two elements. So I may want to just scale that down a bit. I can always come back and tweak these after I've got everything in that corner. I'm going to save it. I'm going to close this out for a minute because now we're going to put our texture UV map on the floor. I'll select it, making sure it's in the object mode. I'm going to go to UVs and planar mapping again. Now, the axis that is perpendicular to that surface is Y, so I'll click on Y, and I'll click on Apply. And once again, you'll notice the distortion. I'm going to close out planar mapping, and now I'm going to go to the channels box, and there is projection width and height, and I'll make that an even number. I'll start with 25 to keep it consistent. But once I get into my texture editor, it's really a matter of fitting all those pieces, so I've got a lot of latitude. Now once I've got it, the projection and height set in my channels window, I'll return to the texture editor. And I know that that's square because I can see in my viewport, so I really don't have to be concerned about the checkerboard pattern. Now I'm going to start scale it down a bit, and then I'm going to just pull it off to the right because I'd like to be able to see the map UV coordinates for the wall so that I can place this without overlapping that. So I'll go back to my object mode, I'll select the wall, and then I'll shift select the floor. Now all I need to do is take the floor and put it over here under the wall somewhere. I'm going to right click inside that shell. It's called a shell. A UV map is called a shell once it's inside the editor. And I'll go up to shell and click on it, select it, and if I don't see my move tool, I'll hit W. So I'm going to place this under here like so it's close to what we've got for our model. Now, I know that I have to put the cube in here as well. So the cube is the smaller of the three elements, which means we don't need a lot of space for it. I'm going to save, and then I'm going to go back to my model, and I'll go back to my object mode. Now I'm going to click on the cube, and because it's a simple piece of geometry, what Maya does is on spheres and cubes and some of the other basic elements, there's an automatic UV map built into it. So you can see here that here our face is squared out in this inverted T. Now once again, I want that to fit in the context of the UV shell of the wall and the floor. I'm going to roll over the T, and I'm going to choose shell. I'll select it, and with my move tool, I'll pull it off to the side. Now I'm going to return to my object mode, and then I'll shift select these three elements. My objective now is to get this T over here and scale it to fit down in this corner. So I'll roll over it, choose shell, select, and I'll move it over here, hit R for my scale tool, and I'll start to bring that down, and I'm going to tuck it right in there. You really want to try to optimize the use of this inner quarter. Now remember, if you've done the crate tutorial before this one, you know that the only live area on your geometry appears in the right hand corner, which means all your textures have to go in that corner. Now I'm going to return to my object mode, and I'm going to select all three of these. So there are my components. Now with them selected, I need to go to polygons, and the very last choice at the bottom of the menu is UV snapshots. And you're going to get a window that's going to be directing you to your project folder. I'll click on Browse, and I'll go to my project folder, and I'll double click. So I'll call it Room Skin. Remember, if you're separating terms of any kind, it's got to be an underscore. And I'm going to hit Save. Now in here, there are some choices you can make. You'll notice that whichever number you change, whether it's X or Y, the aspect ratio is locked. And you'll see that it's a 1-to-1 ratio. So whatever number you change, the other one will be the same. Now I want to ping from my formats because I need the translucent so I can develop a Photoshop file with layers and having this map over it so that I can place my textures appropriately. I'm going to leave this exactly the way it is, and then I'm going to click OK. One thing to note in the process of modeling this room, if you had gone over the tutorial that had just the shipping crate in it, you may recall that in the texture editor, we went to Image, Create PSD Network. That wouldn't work in this instance because our model is comprised of more than just one piece of geometry. Next, we'll go into Photoshop and we'll place our textures that I've provided on their respective UV maps.